The crystal towers of Centrum Prime reflected the light of 3 suns, creating rainbows across the diplomatic station that floated in perfect orbit. Inside the main chamber, representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated seats, discussing trade agreements and border disputes as they had done for thousands of years. The Galactic Council prided itself on maintaining peace through words rather than weapons. War was something their ancestors had abandoned long ago, a dark chapter in history that civilized beings no longer needed to remember. Ambassador? Velthorus of the Carathi species adjusted his translation. Devison prepared to call the next speaker when the alarms began to sound. Red lights flashed across the chamber walls. The holographic display at the center of the room flickered and showed incoming vessels approaching at high speed. Security protocols should have prevented any unauthorized ships from getting this close. Yet dozens of unknown craft were already breaching the outer perimeter. The assembled diplomats watched in confusion as the security feed displayed the approaching fleet. These were not the sleek, polished vessels that typically arrived at council space. These ships looked like they had been through hell itself. Their hulls were scorched black in places, torn open and hastily repaired in others. Massive weapons arrays bristled from every surface, and covering the armor plating were dark stains that made several council members feel suddenly ill. The lead vessel transmitted a message in multiple languages, each one translated perfectly by systems that suggested whoever these newcomers were, they had done their homework. The message was simple and direct. Humanity requested permission to address the Galactic Council on a matter of mutual concern. Velthorus felt his secondary heart skip a beat. Humanity, he accessed the council database quickly, searching for information. The entry was brief. A developing civilization located in a sparse sector of space, still confined to their home system, protected by non-interference protocols. They should not have been capable of interstellar travel, let alone arriving here with a battle fleet. The council chamber erupted in nervous conversation. Some species demanded the vessels be turned away immediately. Others argued that any civilization capable of reaching Centrum Prime deserved to be heard. Velthorus made the decision to allow 3 representatives to dock and enter the chamber under heavy guard. It seemed safer to talk with them here than to create potential hostilities in open space. The docking bay sensors registered the human shuttle as it attached to the station. Security forces took position around the entrance to the chamber. Though none of them had drawn weapons in 300 years, and most hoped they would remember how if needed. The door opened with a soft hiss. Admiral Kungde walked in first. He was not particularly tall, but he carried himself with the bearing of someone who had commanded others in situations where mistakes meant death. His hair was gray, cut short and practical. His uniform was clean, but showed signs of repair and wear. The most striking thing about him was his eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had seen terrible things and done terrible things in return. Behind him came Captain Yuna, younger than the Admiral, but with that same hardness in her expression. She carried a data device and moved with the efficient grace of a trained soldier. Commander Minho followed, his face calm and analytical as he studied the assembled council members with obvious interest. Velthorus stood and addressed them in standard galactic common. "I am Ambassador Velthorus, current speaker for the Galactic Council. We are surprised by your arrival. According to our records, your civilization should not yet possess faster-than-light travel capabilities." Kongde stopped in the center of the chamber and looked around at the assembled aliens. When he spoke, his voice was steady and carried easily through the space. "A lot of things have changed in the last 5 years. We developed faster-than-light travel because we had to. We built these ships because we needed them to survive. And we came here because we have nowhere else to go." Velthorus gestured to the holographic display, which now showed images of the human fleet in orbit. "Your vessels appear to be military craft. The Galactic Council is a place of peace and diplomacy. Why do you arrive with an armed fleet?" The Admiral's expression did not change. "These ships are armed because we just came from war. They're damaged because we've been fighting for our lives. And they're stained with blood because that's what war does. We brought them because they're all we have left." Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Minrati representative, a species known for their pacifist philosophy, stood and spoke in a voice like chiming bells. The council has maintained peace for 3,000 years. We do not tolerate violence or military aggression in neutral space. Captain Yuna stepped forward, her voice sharp. We're not here to threaten anyone. We're here because we need help, and because you need to know what happened to us. What could happen to you? Velthrus raised one clawed hand for silence. The chamber quieted. Very well. The council will hear your testimony. But know that we do not look favorably upon those who glorify warfare or seek to disturb the peace we have worked so hard to maintain. Kongde met the ambassador's eyes without flinching. We didn't come here to glorify anything. We came here to tell you the truth about what's out there in the dark between stars. To tell you about the species that tried to exterminate us, and to ask for membership in this council, not as primitives seeking protection, but as equals who have earned their place through survival. The weight of the admiral's words hung in the air like smoke. The assembled diplomats had lived their entire lives in a galaxy where conflicts were resolved through negotiation and economic pressure. The idea that another species had tried to commit genocide was almost incomprehensible. To them, Velthrus looked at the scarred ships on the display, at the dark stains on their hulls, at the three humans standing before them with the bearing of soldiers who had forgotten what peace felt like. He felt a cold sensation in his chest that might have been fear or might have been recognition of something terrible approaching. The council will hear your full testimony, he said finally. Tell us everything. Admiral Kongde nodded once. It started 5 years ago when they fell from the sky onto our cities like rain. Commander Minho activated the holographic display with practiced efficiency. The rainbow lights of Centrum Prime faded away, replaced by an image of a blue and green world hanging in the darkness of space. Earth looked peaceful from this distance, beautiful even, with white clouds swirling across continents and oceans. Kongde began speaking in a voice that was carefully controlled, each word measured and precise. This is our homeworld. 5 years ago, we were barely capable of reaching our own moon. We had satellites and space stations, but no real presence beyond our planet. We were divided into nearly 200 nations, constantly arguing among ourselves about borders and resources and old grievances. The image changed to show Earth's cities at night, brilliant lights spreading across the dark continents like glowing webs. Yuna stepped forward and continued the story. We had no idea we were being watched. No idea that something had found us and decided we were nothing more than food and raw materials. The holographic display shifted again. This time it showed something that made several council members recoil in their seats. The creatures looked like insects, but scaled up to horrifying size. They had 6 legs, mandibles that could crush metal, and clusters of eyes that gleamed with cold intelligence. Thousands of them poured from ships that looked organic, like they had been grown rather than built. Minho's voice remained calm as he provided context. We call them the Virexians. They operate as a hive mind, with billions of individual organisms controlled by a central consciousness. They don't negotiate. They don't communicate beyond basic threat displays. They consume everything organic on a planet, strip it of useful minerals, then move on to the next world. The display showed the first attacks. The Virexian ships descended on Earth's major population centers without warning. Beijing, New York, Lagos, Moscow, São Paulo, one by one. The great cities of humanity disappeared beneath swarms of alien creatures. The images showed people running through streets as buildings collapsed, children being pulled into the sky by flying Virexians, entire neighborhoods being dissolved by acid spray. Captain Yuna's voice cracked slightly as she spoke. 3 billion people died in the first month. We threw everything we had at them. Our fighter jets were useless against their shields. Our missiles couldn't track their ships. Our armies fought with guns and tanks against enemies that could tear through steel with their bare claws. The council chamber was completely silent now. Even the species who prided themselves on emotional control looked disturbed by the images. Velthrus found himself gripping his chair with enough force to leave marks in the metal. Kongde continued the narrative. Our governments collapsed. Our militaries were scattered. Every nation on Earth had been enemies with at least one other nation for decades or centuries. But within 3 weeks of the invasion, we united. Every human government that still existed signed the Unity Accords. We stopped being Chinese or American or Nigerian. We became human, because that was the only way to survive. The holographic display showed factories being converted overnight. Car manufacturing plants now produced ammunition. Electronics factories started making communications equipment. Shipyards that had built pleasure cruises began constructing warships from designs. Created by international teams working without sleep, Minich brought up schematics on the display. We adapted quickly. We had to. Every civilian who could hold a weapon was trained. Every scientist who could understand the enemy technology was put to work reverse engineering it. We built underground bunkers and moved our remaining population centers below the surface, and we started learning how they thought. The Admiral's expression hardened. The Vrexians are a hive mind, which means they're predictable once you understand the decision tree. Individual units don't improvise. They don't adapt in the moment. They follow patterns set by the central consciousness. We learned to recognize those patterns. We learned to exploit them. Unit displayed footage of the first successful human counterattacks. Small teams of soldiers luring Vraxian units into kill zones. Improvised explosives taking down their flyers. Captured weapons being turned against their former owners. The victories were small and bought with tremendous casualties, but they were victories nonetheless. We realized that capturing their technology intact was crucial, Minho explained. But their ships had self-destruct mechanisms. So we developed boarding tactics. Small teams would sacrifice themselves to breach the hull, disable the self-destruct, and hold long enough for technical teams to arrive. The survival rate for boarding teams was less than 10%. The display showed young men and women in makeshift armor throwing themselves at alien ships. Some succeeded. Most died in the vacuum of space or were torn apart by Vrexian defenders. But each captured ship provided humanity with better weapons, better shields, and better engines. Kong Day's voice grew quieter, but somehow more intense. We learned to build ships that could match theirs. We learned to fight in space. And we learned something important about ourselves. Humans are very, very good at killing when we need to be. The images shifted to show the Battle of Mars, human ships. Smaller and more agile than the Vrexian vessels, darted through an asteroid field. The Vrexian fleet followed, confident in their superior numbers. Then the asteroids began exploding. Nuclear weapons that humanity had hidden throughout the belt detonated in a cascade of destruction. The resulting debris field moved at incredible speeds, shredding the Vrexian ships like paper. That was the turning point, Una said. We stopped defending and started hunting. We tracked their supply convoys. We followed them back to their forward bases, and we destroyed everything we found. The holographic display showed human fleets attacking Vrexian outposts on airless moons and barren worlds. The attacks were brutal and efficient. No prisoners were taken. No mercy was given. Worlds that had been converted into Vrexian breeding grounds were sterilized with nuclear and biological weapons. Several council members stood and began objecting. The Minrati representative's voice rang out high and distressed. This is genocide you're describing. The systematic extermination of an entire species. Kong Day turned to face the speaker directly. His eyes were hard as stone. Yes, it is. They came to exterminate us. We exterminated them instead, because the alternative was our extinction. Commander Minho brought up the final images. A massive world covered in organic structures like a planet-sized nest, human ships approaching by the thousands, and then fire. So much fire that the planet's atmosphere burned. The Admiral's voice was flat and final. 3 months ago, we found their homeworld. We gave them exactly what they gave Earth. We destroyed their civilization completely. The Vrexian species is extinct. We made sure of it. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Ambassador Velthris stood and raised his voice over the chaos filling the council chamber. Representatives from dozens of species were shouting questions, accusations, and demands all at once. Some were calling for the humans to be arrested immediately. Others sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The carefully maintained peace of the Galactic Council was cracking like thin ice. Under pressure, when order was finally restored, Velthris fixed his gaze on Admiral Kong Day. His voice carried accusation and disbelief in equal measure. "What you describe is impossible. Your species was pre-interstellar 5 years ago. The technological gap between you and an established spacefaring species would have been insurmountable. How could you possibly defeat them?" Commander Minho stepped forward before the Admiral could respond. Something in his calm expression shifted, became colder and harder. "You're making an assumption that technology determines victory in war. It doesn't. It determines victory. The side that's willing to sacrifice more, to endure more, to do whatever is necessary regardless of cost. That's the side that wins." You manipulated the holographic controls and brought up detailed tactical displays. "Let me walk you through our evolution as a military force. In year 1, we were slaughtered. We lost 9 billion people. Our tactics were primitive. We fought them like we fought each other, with traditional military doctrine and concern for civilian casualties. It didn't work. The display showed human soldiers trying to establish defensive perimeters around cities. The Vrexians simply overwhelmed them with numbers, flowing around strongpoints, like water around rocks. Civilian populations were consumed faster than they could be evacuated." Captain Yuna continued the explanation. "Year 2, we changed. We realized the Vrexians didn't think like individuals. They thought as a collective. So we started studying their behavioral patterns like you'd study an algorithm. Every attack followed predictable sequences. Every retreat happened at specific loss thresholds. They were efficient, but inflexible. The tactical display shifted to show new human strategies. Small teams using hit-and-run tactics. Attacks timed to coincide with other attacks across the globe, forcing the hive mind to split its attention. Traps designed to trigger the Vrexians' programmed responses and lead them into kill zones. Minho's voice remained analytical, as if he were discussing mathematics rather than mass death. "We also began programs to capture their technology. The first successful ship capture cost us 2,000 soldiers. We threw wave after wave of boarding teams at a single damaged vessel until we overwhelmed its defenses. Most of those soldiers knew they wouldn't survive. They went anyway." The holographic display showed the brutal reality of shipboarding operations. Men and women in sealed suits, using crude cutting tools to breach alien hulls. Firefights in narrow corridors where one wrong move meant explosive decompression. Teams desperately working to disable self-destruct systems while being torn apart by Vrexian defenders. "Each captured ship gave us more data," Yuna explained. "We learned their shield frequencies. We learned their weapons capabilities. We learned their navigation systems. Our scientists worked 20-hour days reverse engineering everything. We went from primitive projectile weapons to energy weapons in 18 months. We went from chemical rockets to basic hyperdrives in 2 years." Kongde spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of terrible memories. "But technology wasn't enough. We had to become something different. Something harder. In year 3, we stopped trying to save everyone. We evacuated cities and turned them into traps. We lured the Vrexians in with false population signatures, then collapsed entire city blocks on top of them. We used nuclear weapons on our own territory if it meant killing more of them." A council member from the Tarathi species, a race known for their philosophical nature, stood with visible distress. "You sacrificed your own people as bait?" The Admiral met their gaze without shame. "We sacrificed volunteers who knew what they were signing up for. People who had already lost everything and wanted their deaths to matter. We gave them that chance. And their sacrifices bought time for millions of others to survive." Minho brought up star charts, showing the solar system and the surrounding space. By year 4, we had achieved space superiority around Earth. We built shipyards on the far side of our moon, protected by asteroid fortifications. We constructed a fleet using hybrid technology, combining our industrial capacity with Vrexian innovations. And we started tracking their logistics. The display showed Vrexian supply lines stretching back through multiple star systems. Human ships began appearing on the chart, small raids that targeted convoys and supply depots. Each raid was planned with brutal efficiency, maximizing damage while minimizing human casualties. Yuna's expression grew dark. We learned where their reinforcements came from. We found their staging worlds, the places where they bred new soldiers and built new ships. Some council members might say we should have stopped there, should have been content with defending our home. But we understood something you apparently don't. She paused and looked around the chamber at the assembled aliens. An enemy that tried to exterminate you once will try again if given the chance. The only way to truly win is to make sure they never get that chance. So we hunted them. The holographic display showed human fleets systematically destroying Vrexian colonies. Worlds that had been transformed into massive breeding facilities were sterilized. Orbital stations were reduced to debris. Every trace of Vrexian presence was methodically eliminated. Kong? Oh. Day's voice was quiet, but everyone in the chamber heard every word. We tracked them back to their homeworld. It took us 6 months to gather enough forces for the final assault. We knew they'd be waiting for us. We knew casualties would be catastrophic, but we also knew it had to be done. Commander Minho displayed the battle data from the final engagement. 5,000 human ships against 15,000 Vrexian defenders. The numbers should have been impossible odds. But the humans had learned every trick, exploited every weakness, and fought with the desperation of a species that knew there was no second chance. We used their own hive mind against them, Minho explained. We hit them with coordinated attacks from multiple vectors simultaneously. The central consciousness couldn't process that many threats at once efficiently. Individual units hesitated, waiting for orders that came too slowly. We overwhelmed their decision-making capacity. The display showed the methodical destruction of the Vrexian homeworld. Every structure was targeted. Every ship was destroyed. When the bombardment was complete, humanity deployed biological weapons specifically designed to kill Vrexian genetics. Nothing was left to chance. Captain Yuna's voice was hard and final. We made sure they were extinct, completely, because anything less would have been a failure. We couldn't risk them rebuilding, couldn't risk them coming for us again, or going after another species the way they came after us. The council chamber was silent except for the soft hum of the environmental systems. Ambassador Velthrus looked at the 3 humans standing before them and felt something he hadn't experienced in his long life. Not fear exactly, but recognition of what these beings had become. They weren't the primitive species Earth had been 5 years ago. There was something forged in fire and blood into weapons of survival. The Admiral spoke one final time. You asked how we did the impossible? The answer is simple. We did what we had to do. We became what we needed to be. And now we're here. The council chamber felt different now, charged with tension that hadn't existed an hour before. Ambassador Velthrus looked around at his fellow council members and saw expressions he rarely witnessed in this place: fear, doubt, uncertainty. The carefully constructed framework of galactic civilization was being questioned by the presence of 3 humans and their blood-stained warships. The Minrati representatives stood first, their crystalline bodies shimmering with agitation. What you have described is not victory. It is atrocity. You admit to genocide, to the complete extermination of another species. The Galactic Council was founded specifically to prevent such barbarism. Kongde looked at the speaker with eyes that showed no remorse. The Vrexians came to our world to exterminate every human being. They killed 12 billion of us. They dissolved our children in acid. They consumed our elderly alive. And you want to lecture us about barbarism? A large being from the Korthon species, a race that resembled armored bears, rumbled a response. There are always alternatives to complete destruction. Negotiation, containment, forced relocation. The Council has resolved countless conflicts through diplomatic means. Captain Yuna laughed, and the sound was bitter enough to make several council members flinch. Negotiate with a hive mind that views all other species as food. Contain a civilization that spreads across star systems like a plague? Relocate creatures that breed by the billions? She shook her head. You're speaking from inexperience. You've never faced something that wants to erase you from existence. Commander Minho stepped forward, his analytical mind clearly working through the political dynamics of the room. I think what troubles you isn't that we committed genocide. It's that we're here, armed and capable, proving that violence still works in a galaxy you've convinced yourselves has evolved beyond it. Velthris felt uncomfortable at how accurately the human had assessed the situation. The Galactic Council has maintained peace for 3,000 years, precisely because we established rules that all civilized species follow. Rules against military aggression, against territorial expansion through force, against using extinction-level weapons. You have broken every one of those rules. The Admiral crossed his arms. We weren't part of your council when we broke your rules. We were fighting for survival in a war we didn't start. And I noticed none of you bothered to help us. Where was the Galactic Council when billions of humans were dying? A diplomatic representative from the Valasian species, known for their skill in negotiation, spoke in a soothing tone. Your world was under non-interference protocols. We believed you were a developing civilization that needed to evolve naturally. Una's voice cut through the diplomatic language like a knife. So you knew we existed. You had the capability to monitor us. But when an extinction-level threat appeared, you did nothing because of a protocol. How civilized of you. The chamber erupted in defensive responses. Multiple council members tried to explain that non-interference was a sacred principle, that emerging civilizations needed to develop their own solutions, that the council couldn't intervene in every conflict. But their words sounded hollow even to themselves. Kongde waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. We're not here to argue about the past. We're here because humanity needs a future. Our world is damaged. Our population is a fraction of what it was. We need resources, technology, and trade partners to rebuild. That's why we're requesting membership in the Galactic Council. Velthris felt his 3 hearts sink. You want to join the council? After everything you've just told us? The Admiral nodded. We've proven we can defend ourselves. We've eliminated a threat that would have eventually reached your borders. The Vrexians were expanding toward council space. In 20 years, maybe 30, they would have been your problem. We solved it for you. Commander Minho projected new data onto the holographic display. Star charts showing Vrexian expansion patterns, trajectory calculations, population growth curves. The math was clear and undeniable. The Vrexian swarm had been on a collision course with the outer systems of council space. A small, amphibious being from the Quellan species examined the data with obvious alarm. You're certain of this? Minho's voice was absolutely confident. Completely. We studied them for 5 years. We know their expansion patterns better than they knew themselves. You would have faced them eventually. And based on what we've seen of your current military capabilities, you would have lost. The chamber fell silent at that assessment. Several council members looked offended, but none of them could immediately dispute the claim. The Galactic Council hadn't fought a real war in millennia. Their security forces were more like police than soldiers. Their ships were designed for patrol and transport, not combat. Velthris cleared his throat. Even if we accept that you eliminated a potential threat, your methods are incompatible with council principles. We cannot endorse a civilization that treats genocide as an acceptable solution. Captain Una stepped forward, her young face hard with conviction. Then what is acceptable? Letting yourselves be slaughtered because you're too moral to fight back effectively. The Vrexians didn't understand your principles. The next threat won't either. You've built this beautiful civilization on the assumption that everyone plays by the same rules. But they don't. A heated philosophical debate erupted. Council members argued about the nature of civilization, about whether peace could be maintained through strength or only through mutual cooperation. They discussed ethics and morality, the value of principles versus the reality of survival. Through it all, the 3 humans stood quietly, waiting. They had made their case. They had shown what they were capable of. Now they were letting the council grapple with uncomfortable truths. Finally, Velthrus raised his hand for silence. The council needs time to deliberate. This decision cannot be made hastily. You will be provided accommodations while we consider your request. Kong Day shook his head. We'll remain on our ships. We're comfortable there. He paused, then added, and we're not disarming them. We learned the hard way what happens when you make yourself vulnerable. The admiral turned to leave, followed by his two officers. As they reached the door, Yuna stopped and looked back at the assembled council. You know what the real difference is between us and you? We remember that the universe doesn't care about your principles. It's not moral or immoral. It's indifferent. We survived because we accepted that reality. You've forgotten it because you've been lucky enough to not need to remember. The three humans left the chamber. The door closed behind them with a soft hiss. The council members sat in silence, each dealing with their own thoughts. Velthrus looked at his colleagues and saw something he had never seen before in all his years on the council. They were afraid. Not of the humans exactly, but of what the humans represented. The galaxy might not be as safe as they had believed. Peace might not be as stable as they had assumed. And somewhere out in the darkness between stars, there might be other threats they didn't know about. Threats that wouldn't be stopped by diplomatic protocols and strongly worded resolutions. The comfortable certainty of the Galactic Council had been shattered by three humans and their blood-stained ships of war. For 3 days, the human fleet remained in orbit around Centrum Prime, while the Galactic Council deliberated behind closed doors. The scarred warships maintained perfect formation, weapons powered down but clearly ready to activate at a moment's notice. Council security forces watched them nervously. Uncertain whether these visitors were potential allies or potential threats, on the third night of deliberations, Admiral Kongde stood alone on the observation deck of his flagship, looking at the diplomatic station below. The rainbow lights reflecting off its crystal towers seemed almost mockingly peaceful. Behind him, the door opened softly. A small shuttle had arrived without announcing itself through official channels. The being who entered the observation deck was a Korthon military advisor named Torvak. It's one of the few council members with actual combat experience from his species' pre-council days. He approached the admiral carefully. I should not be here, Torvak said without preamble. But I wanted to speak with you privately. Kongde didn't turn around. You're the 5th secret visitor we've had in the last 2 days. Everyone wants something from us, but nobody wants to be seen asking for it. Korthon made a sound that might have been laughter. You understand politics better than you pretend. The council is fracturing over your request. Some species want to reject you completely. Others see opportunity. The admiral turned. What kind of opportunity? Torvak's expression was difficult to read on his alien features, but his voice was serious. My species remembers warfare. We were warriors before we joined the council and accepted their peace. We've been watching your ships, analyzing their capabilities. The weapon systems alone represent advances we haven't seen in centuries. Several species want to purchase your technology. Some want defensive pacts. Others want you as far from their borders as possible. Back in the council chamber, Commander Minho and Captain Yuna sat in a small waiting room adjacent to the main floor. Yuna was cleaning her sidearm, a habit she'd developed during the war when equipment maintenance might mean the difference between life and death. Minho was reading reports on his datapad, studying the cultural profiles of every council species. They're going to reject us, Yuna said quietly. I can feel it. Minho didn't look up from his reading. Probably. We're too different from what they've become. We remind them of their own violent past, and they don't want to remember. Then why are we waiting? Because the Admiral believes in trying the diplomatic route first, and because watching them struggle with this decision tells us more about their weaknesses than any intelligence report could. Yuna smiled grimly. You really do think like a spy. I think like someone who understands that information is as valuable as firepower. We came here to join their council, but we're leaving with a complete assessment of their military capabilities, political divisions, and strategic vulnerabilities. That knowledge might be more useful than membership anyway. On the observation deck, Torvak was still talking. You should know that the vote will go against you. Ambassador Velthrus has convinced enough species that accepting your membership would legitimize violence as a solution to galactic problems. They fear what you represent more than they appreciate what you accomplished. Kongde nodded slowly. We expected that. Civilizations that have forgotten how to fight rarely welcome those who remember. The Korthon studied the human carefully. You're not surprised. Not even disappointed? Disappointed? No. We came here hoping for partnership, but preparing for rejection. Humans learned a long time ago that you can't rely on others to save you. We'll find our own way. Torvak leaned forward. Before you leave, my government wants to discuss a private arrangement. We would be interested in a defensive alliance and technology exchange. Several other species have expressed similar interests through unofficial channels. The Admiral considered this. So the Council as a whole rejects us, but individual members want to benefit from what we've learned. That's very pragmatic of them. Is that a yes? That's a we'll consider it. Right now, I need to focus on getting my people through the next few years. Everything else is secondary. The next morning, the Council reconvened in full session. The 3 human representatives were summoned back to the chamber. The assembled aliens looked tired, as if the debate had taken more out of them than they wanted to admit. Ambassador Velthris stood at his podium, his expression carefully neutral. The Galactic Council has reached a decision regarding humanity's request for membership. Kongde, Yuna, and Minho stood in the center of the chamber, waiting. The Admiral's face showed nothing, but his hands were clasped behind his back in a posture that his crew would recognize as his combat stance. After extensive deliberation, Velthris continued. The Council has determined that humanity cannot be granted full membership at this time. Your civilization's recent history of violence and your methods of warfare are incompatible with Council principles and values. Nobody was surprised. Several Council members looked relieved. A few looked uncomfortable with the decision. However, Velthris added, we recognize that your species has demonstrated technological capability and that you eliminated a potential threat to galactic security. Therefore, we are prepared to offer you associated status. This would grant you limited trading rights, access to neutral territories, and the possibility of full membership in the future should your civilization demonstrate appropriate evolution. It was meant to sound like a compromise, a diplomatic solution that acknowledged humanity's capabilities while maintaining the Council's principles. But everyone in the chamber understood what it really was. A rejection dressed up as conditional acceptance. Captain Yuna started to speak. But Admiral Kongde raised one hand slightly. She fell silent. The Admiral looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of as many Council members as he could. When he spoke, his voice was calm and clear. The Galactic Council has made its decision, and we respect that. But humanity declines your offer of associated status. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the chamber. Velthris looked genuinely shocked. You're refusing our offer? We didn't come here as supplicants begging for scraps, Kongde said. We came as equals requesting partnership. You've made it clear you don't see us that way. That's your choice. But we won't accept a lesser status and spend years proving ourselves to civilizations who stood by while we fought for survival. Commander Minho added his voice to the Admirals. We'll take our fleet, our technology, and our hard-won experience, and we'll chart our own course. We'll find worlds to colonize, species to trade with, and we'll build our civilization without your Council's approval. Yuna's voice carried an edge of defiance. And when the next threat comes, and something appears that doesn't care about your diplomatic protocols and peace treaties, don't expect humanity to rush to your defense. You had a chance to stand with us. You chose not to. The Council chamber erupted in protests and objections. Some members demanded the humans reconsider. Others accused them of arrogance and foolishness. A few sat quietly, perhaps reconsidering the decision that had just been made. Admiral Kongde waited for the noise to die down, then delivered his final statement. You sit in your crystal palace and debate ethics while protected by peace. You didn't earn in borders you didn't even know were threatened. We fought in the dark, alone, and won. We learned that the universe is not kind or fair. It simply is, and we learned to survive it on our own terms. He looked directly at Ambassador Velthris. One day, maybe soon, or maybe generations from now, you'll face a threat you can't negotiate with. A species that doesn't care about your principles or your traditions. When that day comes, remember this moment. Remember that you turned away the only species in this galaxy that still remembers how to fight and win. The three humans turned and walked toward the exit. No one tried to stop them. As they reached the door, Una paused and looked back one more time. We came here with blood on our ships because we've been to war. Real war. Not the theoretical kind you study in your histories. We know what it costs and what it takes to survive. You've forgotten. I hope for your sake you never have to remember. The door closed behind them with a finality that seemed to echo through the chamber. Within hours, the human fleet began preparations to depart. Admiral Kangde stood on the bridge of his flagship as the departure sequence initiated. Around him, his crew worked with the practiced efficiency of people who operated these controls under enemy fire. Captain Yuna approached him quietly. Sir, we're receiving multiple private communications from individual council species. They want to open negotiations for technology exchanges and defensive pacts. The Admiral smiled slightly. Respond to all of them. Set up meetings at neutral locations. Just because the Council rejected us doesn't mean we can't work with its members. Commander Minho looked up from his station. Orders for the fleet, sir? Kongde looked at the view screen, showing Centrum Prime and its rainbow lights growing smaller in the distance. Set course for the frontier regions. We have surveys showing dozens of uninhabited worlds suitable for colonization. We'll build our own civilization. On our own terms?